Phillies lose yesterday on opening day. In a way, Frank, we might see them lose a lot this year. The bullpen blows a great effort by Jeremy Hellickson yesterday, who pitched really well, gave up just 3 hits. My first question would really be, I guess it's early in the year, but why'd they pull him?
Yeah, I think the problem was, if you look at his pitch counts in spring training, he never really pitched that deep into games and never threw that many pitches. You might remember he had that one start where he went 5 innings and gave up no hits, and it took him just 37 pitches to get through 5 innings. So in terms of pitch counts, he's been pretty low through spring training, so maybe Pete Mackanin just thought that he was going to quit while he was ahead.
All right, so they bring in David Hernandez. Now, he was supposed to be the the closer, and he comes in that 8th inning. So he didn't get the first crack at closing the game. Were you surprised that they went to him?
You know, I tended to think that they were going to avoid Hernandez as the closer just because he never really seemed to get into a groove after he had that little bit of elbow soreness in spring training. So I kind of wonder if something's majorly wrong with him, but we'll have to see. I mean, he already went through one Tommy John surgery, so I kind of thought that they kind of used him lately in spring training down the stretch, and I didn't think he really warranted the closer's role, so while he might have been sort of the favorite as the one veteran arm that they brought into the team on a major league deal this year, it was not really a surprise that they weren't going to go to him in the 9th inning for me.
Frank Klose is with us, of course, 97.3 ESPN.com, part of Sports Talk Philly and Philadelphia.com. Frank's mailbag is up, and before we get to those mailbag questions, a quick move today. Ernesto Frieri got released by the team, and they had a bunch of these veteran former closer type of guys they brought in. I guess he just didn't have it in the arm anymore. I know he's had some arm issues, but also had some issues with the long ball, it seemed like, this spring.
Well, I kind of wonder if they had a handshake agreement with him, because if you remember, they had up until Thursday to either add him to the roster or set him free, and they didn't do so then, and we didn't really hear any update on that regard. So maybe they asked him just to hang around a few more days so that they could decide, and then ultimately, when he didn't make the team, maybe he asked for it.
Frank Klose with us here on 97.3 ESPN, and Frank, do you see the front office trying to improve the bullpen, especially given the events that took place yesterday?
Well, it depends on what your question is in terms of what improved means. I think they're not going to overreact right away based on the first game. So I think they're going to sort of let the arms that are in camp get an opportunity to sort of find their groove the next few days. Now, if they're getting shelled every day and it's 2 weeks in, I think that might be a different story. But one way they might improve it is they might reach down to AAA. I personally thought that Luis Garcia was sent down a little too soon. I thought that he pitched better than Hector Neris in spring training. So the first move they might make may be to swap the two of them, because Hector Neris does have the ability to be optioned to the minor leagues, and they won't have to lose anybody on their 40-man roster to make that switch. So that would be the first move I think they make is to swap the two of them, because it's the most convenient move that they could possibly make. But I think Hector Neris will get a few more chances first before they would do something like that. And then the next name to look at is Andrew Bailey by May 1st. He's going to have to show at AAA that he's got something left in his arm, and if he does, before his opt-out date, the Phillies will have to decide to bring him up or lose him. At that point, they might opt to bring him up if there is continued struggles in the bullpen.
So as currently constructed, how do you see the best setup of them using the pieces that they have? Do you agree with necessarily how they did it yesterday? Do you think there's a different way for them to do it with the pieces they have right now?
Well, I do think that Jeanmar Gomez is probably the most reliable arm in the bullpen right now. That sounds kind of alarming when you would say that. He would not be the first arm I took out of the bullpen. I would try to save him for a little bit later, and I would see if Brett Oberholzer could give them something towards the back end of the bullpen eventually. I think that's where it's going to sort of end up, because Daniel Stumpf, the Rule 5 pick, he is not going to be a back-end arm, and I think that's pretty clear. And Oberholzer, I think, is going to sort of work his way towards the back as other arms might struggle. So I would agree with letting Hossa close, which seemed to be what was going to happen yesterday. But leading up to him, I would put Gomez and Oberholzer, sort of the 7th, 8th inning types, depending on matchups for now.
Frank Klose is with us looking at the Phillies mailbag, and one of the questions from Pam, she wants to know why the Phillies traded Ken Giles away, and we know their bullpen's going to struggle this year, but in hindsight, was that still the only reason I think that's a good question is because their starting rotation's not horrible, and it could be very frustrating for guys like an Aaron Nola or Jeremy Hellickson or Jared, as younger guys who get you to a certain point and then have their great efforts wasted by a bad bullpen. So, was trading Giles a prudent move?
Well, I think one reason that the starting rotation is, as you put it, not horrible, is because of that trade. I mean, adding Vince Velasquez to the 5th spot in the rotation, that makes the team much better right now. Mark Appel down the line, perhaps, still has the potential to be a strong arm in the starting rotation. And Brett Oberholzer will give you something, too. And they still have 2 prospects beyond that. One is Thomas Eshelman, who is rated today on MLB.com as one of the underrated prospects in the game. And don't forget Jonathan Aruz, or is it Howard Aruz? I keep mixing the two up. Who would have thought they would trade an Aruz for an Aruz? But yes, it's Harold that they got back from the Houston Astros. So basically, I think that this deal was just way too good to pass up. If you look into a team like the Chicago Cubs, now it took them a couple years, but they essentially went through and they cashed out every asset that they had under their control. So in doing that, then you bring lots of talent back, and as we know with prospects, as we've seen over the years when sort of Dominic Brown was the one prospect the Phillies seemed to have left, and he did not pan out, we know that prospects don't always pan out. So by overloading the system with as many as you possibly can, the odds are better in your favor that some of them work out. So looking at the closer market this past offseason, the San Diego Padres got a ton for Craig Kimbrell, and at that point, if you realize that the market sets the going rate for closers that high, well, then it's time for the Phillies to cash in. And even if they don't get a lockdown closer from their own system, I know they'll probably give Jimmy Cordero a look. He's another flamethrower that's in the minor league prospect. If he's not the pitcher that they want him to be, and he doesn't work out as a closer, the Phillies have money. Going out on the free agent market and signing a closer is a lot easier, perhaps, for the Phillies and other teams because they're going to have the money because all their players will be young, under team control, and cheap.
Hey, Frank, what was your take on Odubel Herrera yesterday? I know that on the Phillies broadcast, and of course that's a broadcast where they kind of use kid gloves and they don't really criticize, it seemed like they were kind of taking issues with his swings and his attempts in the game. Just what did you see from Odubel Herrera?
Yeah, I did see that. They were sort of pointing out that he was a little bit off balance and needs to get his timing right. And part of the problem is that he's missed some time with that little nagging finger injury. And when I saw him play on Thursday in Reading, I saw him shaking his hand after hitting a ground ball and running to first. So he might be a little tentative still, and it could just be a matter that he's got to just get his timing back together. And the only way to do that is to hit. So hopefully he'll be taking some swings in the batting cage and taking a little extra BP until he does that. So yeah, he does seem like he's a little out of whack, but he does have the ability to hit. So I think it's just a matter of doing it, and he'll get his swing back.
But Frank, I think what might be more interesting to keep an eye on here sometimes is the Pigs rotation, which will start with Jake Thompson on Thursday, Adam Morgan on Friday, Zach Eflin on Saturday, Mark Appel on Sunday, and David Buchanan on Monday. So that should be something fun to keep an eye on through the course of this year as well.
Absolutely, and I think one thing that's worth noting too is some of these starters got bumped to Double-A Reading just because there wasn't room, buddy. So somebody like Alec Asher, who made a bunch of starts for the Phillies last year, granted he was well beyond when he should have been promoted to the major leagues, but he's going to be a Double-A. So I mean they have too many arms, which is a wonderful problem to have.
Any of those guys worthy of putting in the bullpen?
I wouldn't do it. As you well know, because I've said it a bunch of times on here, I might have considered Adam Morgan for the bullpen and try to get him into that left-handed bullpen role now. because they do have an abundance of starters. But aside from him, nobody's really ready to come up. I mean, I think we both know the result if we threw David Buchanan in the bullpen, right?
Well, I just wonder if some of the guys like an Alec Asher, that is their long-term fit on this team in the rotation because there's so much competition with Jake Thompson and Zach Eflin and some of these other guys that have been acquired. Is somebody, eventually going to have to bump to the bullpen?
Yeah, I think that'll happen down the line. One of our writers, Wilkins, he was actually advocating for Alec Asher to go to the bullpen right now, just to sort of, not the Phillies' major league bullpen, but at least at AAA Lehigh Valley, just to sort of get himself prepared because, he seems further down on the depth chart. But I do understand what they're doing. They want to try to develop as many of these players as they possibly can as starters and give them a longer look, and that'll perhaps make the question a little bit easier to answer later on. And right now they have the luxury of being patient and seeing what the guys provide. But certainly, if a lot of these are starters that we don't have room for all of them in the Phillies bullpen, then I think we're going to see the Phillies convert some into relievers, and it won't necessarily be a demotion, but it'll be something that'll really help out the bullpen and avoid losses like yesterday's.
He's Frank Klose, at Frank Klose with a K, 973, over at 973 ESPN.com, part of SportsTalkPhilly.com and Philadelphia.com. His mailbag is posted on Mondays. We answer them here on Tuesdays. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, guys.